Okay, good afternoon to my colleagues on the East Coast and good morning to my colleagues across the rest of the country. Today we are going to be doing our third webinar of the GTL Center August webinar series. The title of our webinar today is Tools to Strengthen Educator Pipelines and Address Shortages. We're very excited to be talking about this today along with colleagues from the CEEDAR Center and the Learning Policy Institute. Before we begin the webinar, I'm going to go over a few webinar norms. Right now, your line is muted to improve audio quality during the presentation. Because your line is muted, we're going to be using the chat box to moderate discussion. If at any point during the webinar you have a question or a comment, please use the chat box to put that out to the entire audience. We will pause periodically throughout the presentation to respond to questions from the chat box, and we really hope that you are utilizing that feature as a way to get discussion going across the audience. So I mentioned that today is our third webinar in the GTL Center August webinar series. The theme of our webinar series has been Talent Management Strategies for High Needs Context, reflecting on equitable access from Hawaii to Wisconsin. In year 7 of the GTL Center, we have very much focused on projects that are intended to address issues of equitable access, and specifically focused on high needs contexts or populations of students who are most in need of access to effective instruction. The purpose of this webinar series is to share lessons learned from projects that the GTL Center has undertaken that deal with various educator talent management strategies that are designed to specifically to address local contexts and increase equitable access for all students. So here on the screen you can see just a number of the projects that we have undertaken through the GTL Center on educator talent management strategies for equitable access, ranging from mentoring induction, grow your own, to teaching conditions, to diversifying the educator workforce, which we will speak to today, and many other topics. Throughout all of these projects, which are designed to increase equitable access to effective educators, we've used a similar process, a 3-phase technical assistance process where we have worked with local stakeholders to assess needs and plan and prepare for action. We have then worked to implement, monitor, and improve these evidence-based talent management strategies, and finally scaling up and sustaining these changes. So today we're going to be talking about tools that can help with all 3 phases to strengthen educator pipelines, specifically by diversifying the educator workforce and addressing special education. So I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague Meg Kamen of the CEEDAR Center, who is going to talk about our objectives for today.
Hi everyone, glad to be here. Today we really have 2 objectives for our webinar. First, we're just going to talk briefly about the research and practices for strengthening our pipeline, our educator pipeline, specifically in diversifying the workforce and talking specifically about addressing special education teacher shortages. And we're going to spend most of our time previewing toolkits from a toolkit that was generated together from the GTL Center and CEEDAR, along with an additional toolkit from the Learning Policy Institute. We're really happy to have them with us today as well. Go ahead, Lindsay. So I want to talk a little bit about the presenters here today. Introduce myself. I'm Meg Kamen. I am the co-director of the CEEDAR Center, and as you just heard me say, we partnered with GTL on creating a shortage toolkit. And my colleague Lindsay Hayes is with us. She is representing the GTL Center. She also works with us on CEEDAR, so a little bit of a dual role with us today. And we're so happy that Ryan Saunders is also with us today, who is a policy advisor from the Learning Policy Institute. And they have some really great tools there, and he's going to walk us through those today as well. So I want to start off with a quick poll. Now that you know who we are and where we're from, we would like to know who is in our audience. So if we can kick off that poll, that would be great. We would just like to know, are you from a state department? Are you from a district? Are you from an educator preparation program? or are you from a technical assistance center? If you can please answer that poll, that would be great. Just give you a minute. Not even a minute, more like 10 seconds. Great, can we close out that poll and take a look at the answers? Let's see. So if we look, we have, we're about a third state education agencies, a few district folks, educator prep providers, and technical assistance centers. So we have a nice healthy mix of everyone who is with us today. Fantastic. Okay, so I want to lay out for us some guiding principles as we're moving forward. We're going to talk a lot about shortages and what that means for all of us and how we can kind of tackle those using some toolkits, but there's really three guiding principles to think about here. One is an unwavering commitment to equity for every student. This is something that's really important and that is underlying all of the work that we're doing as we're thinking about these shortages. We also have a focus on the local context and needs. While you just heard, we have a lot of different people here from different areas who are partnering together, and we're going to talk about why that's really important. We really need to have a focus on the local context and the needs that are going on, because every context has different needs and there are different things that we need to attend to. So that's really important as we're thinking about shortages. And finally, that we have collaboration across stakeholders. The only way that we're going to be able to solve these shortage areas is if we work together across all of these partners, all of the people who are here today. We have to sit down to work together across the entire continuum if we're going to be able to make a dent in this all together. So in the chat pod, you'll see I'd like to get you engaged. I'd like to know from your perspective, we have people from all different areas here in the continuum. What do you see as the most important piece? What do you think are the most important stakeholders here for strengthening our pipelines? Like, where should we go first? You can just put your answers in the chat pod. That would be fantastic. Who do you think we need to have at the table? Who's most important for strengthening these shortages? Lindsay, is no one writing in the chat pod, or am I just not seeing it?
I think we have to get people awake and engaged today. I put a comment in the chat pod that says, I think having ed prep at the table is very important. I'm very encouraged to see the number of ed prep providers who are on the webinar today. So please respond in the chat pod.
In the chat pod. If you don't know where your chat pod is, it's on your little screen on the control panel.
And just for our presenters, this is Jenny. I'm helping moderate today. If you look in the question section, you'll see a nice sample of responses for all of you to see.
Oh, okay, great. Maybe we're not just utilizing the chat pod. Oh yeah, wow, there's lots of answers in there. Fantastic. Great. School districts, grow your own programs, community partners, principals, families and communities. Absolutely. So you all are bringing our point together, which is there are so many important people that are bringing together to collaborate on this issue. So thank you for contributing here and thinking this through. And I'm going to pass it over to Lindsay. No, to Ryan.
Actually, you are passing it over to me, Meg, and I'm going to talk about our first set of tools for today, which are about insights for diversifying the educator workforce, the data tool for practitioners. This is a very exciting set of tools from the GTL Center. And what I want to do is start by sharing some data for reflection around diversifying the educator workforce. So what this graph shows is the racial and ethnic makeup of the teacher workforce in the United States, starting at the year 1987 and going through 2012. And so this takes a look at the racial makeup of teachers in the categories of white, black, Hispanic, and other, and shows throughout the total workforce what percentage of teachers are falling into which categories. And something I am very much struck by as I take a look at this image is the predominance of white teachers in the workforce in the United States. We can see that from 1987 to 2012. The percentage of white teachers as compared to other teachers of color, although the percentage of teachers of color has increased, it has not increased very much, and it takes from that period of 1987 where it started about roughly 87% of the teacher workforce was white. In 2012, that has only decreased to about 84% of the teacher workforce. So something I think that this visual very much captures is that the teacher workforce in the United States is predominantly white, and although the share of teachers of colors is growing, it is not growing very quickly. I think this is an especially interesting graph to take a look at, particularly when we think about what's happening at the same time with our student population in the United States. So the student population in the United States in this time span has changed dramatically. And in fact, in about 2014, for the first time in US history, just a little over half of students in US schools were students of color. Now think about that statistic, roughly half of students in US schools being students of color, and compare that to what this graph looks like. And we can tell right away that there is very much a mismatch between the diversity of the educator workforce in the US and the racial and ethnic makeup of the student population in the United States. So why should we be concerned about this? Why does a diverse educator workforce matter? Well, we know many things from the research. We know that diverse educators hold high expectations for minority students. They serve as role models. We know from research that diverse teachers are more likely to make equitable assignments to gifted and talented programs. And we know that diverse teachers improve outcomes, a range of outcomes for students, including better disciplinary outcomes, better academic outcomes, better graduation outcomes, things of that nature. But we know diverse educators matter, and we know that they improve outcomes for students and improve the school experience for students. We really want to make the point through this set of tools that diversifying the educator workforce is about educator effectiveness. We believe that a diverse educator workforce is an effective educator workforce. So when we have a teacher workforce that reflects the student population that they are serving, we know that that diversity is important because those teachers are able to embed culturally responsive practices in their instruction that lead to better outcomes for students with disabilities. And we know that when that happens, we are able to provide better access to effective instruction for all students through effective educators. And I want to also make the point that this is a both-and solution. Yes, we absolutely do need a diverse educator workforce because a diverse educator workforce is more effective, but we absolutely do need all teachers to be embedding culturally responsive practices into their instruction. And we hope that through diversifying the educator workforce, we have a cadre of teachers who are ready to lead that charge. So where is our starting point for talking about diversifying the educator workforce? Well, first we need to talk about our data. Where are we seeing gaps start in the diversity of the educator workforce? We saw that graph a few slides ago that showed the diversity of the teacher workforce. Where is that comparing with the student population? We need to start with asking ourselves the question, which student demographics are most underrepresented as they compare to the educator workforce? From there, we really need to, across partners, take a look at data and then really dive deep into the root causes for these gaps that we are seeing between the diversity of the teacher workforce and the diversity of the student population. When we are diving deep into those root causes, we need to be asking questions, well, why do we see gaps developing between the teacher workforce and the student population here? Do we have challenges recruiting candidates of color? Are there potentially issues with the quality of preparation experiences? Are there discriminatory hiring practices in play? Are there just generally higher attrition rates for teachers of color? What are the working conditions that are going into causing some of these gaps to occur? Once partners have come together to really dive deep into the root causes behind these gaps, it's important then to think about strategies within the local context. And that's something that is very important when we're talking about diversifying the educator workforce. Context is absolutely crucial. The reasons for disparities in the diversity of the educator workforce might be different from district to district, or school to school, or between schools within a district. And it's very important that that local context is taken into consideration when taking a look at the gaps and then drilling down into root causes. So in order to assist with that process of analyzing data and drilling down into root causes, the GTL Center developed their Insights on Diversifying the Educator Workforce data tool. And I'm going to be walking you through the data tool today. The data tool contains 3 different lenses with which to look at the diversity of the educator workforce. The first is the development of gaps. Where are we seeing gaps develop in the diversity of the educator workforce as compared to the student population that they are teaching? Where are we, the next we call the minority hiring funnel, where are we seeing significant moments of attrition across the educator career continuum as we move minority teacher candidates from attracting them to preparing them to retaining them? And finally, we'll take a look at parity gaps between educators and students. The first one I'm going to talk about is the development of gaps lens. And let's center ourselves back for a moment on that graph I showed a few slides ago, where we talked about the fact that right now, approximately speaking, we know we have roughly 50% of the student population in the United States who is white and 50% of the students in the United States who are non-white. We start with that data point for the student population. So of 100% of students, 50% fall into each group. Now, how does that compare with the diversity of the teacher workforce? Well, in 2012, we knew that about 84% of the teaching workforce was white, compared with about 16% of the teaching workforce being non-white. Already, even just between that point of the student population and the teacher workforce, we see a huge gap developing. The teacher workforce does not reflect the same kind of diversity as the student population. Now, we recognize that there are a lot of steps between the student population that we are serving and getting to a diverse and effective educator workforce. And this is why I want to center us back on that guiding principle that Meg shared, that we have to be looking at diversity of the educator workforce across the entire career continuum. So this is what the development of gaps lens is designed to do. Take a look at how gaps between white teachers within the educator workforce and non-white teachers within the educator workforce are expanding, staying the same, or closing as these teachers move from being students themselves to entering teacher preparation programs to entering a district or school hiring pipeline. So this is an image of what the development of gaps lens in our data tool looks like. Across the bottom, you will see the various points along that educator career continuum, starting with the student population. So what is the student population from which we are drawing our teaching workforce, all the way through being enrolled in school, graduating high school, and then enrolling in a post-secondary program. What happens then when we have teacher preparation, when we enter the teacher preparation phase and we have candidates who are applying, being admitted, enrolling, and having their degree conferred? After that happens, we know that then there are a series of steps where teachers need to pass licensure tests, be certified, and then they're in the district pipeline where they're submitting applications, going on interviews, and ultimately being selected and accepting an offer. From there, then, we hope that we are retaining these teachers for a very long time. But we know that for the purposes of taking a look at our data, we know that that 1 to 5 year retention mark is a very important thing to be looking at for diversifying the educator workforce. So what this visual does is help us compare the percentage of white teachers with the percentage of non-white teachers, so we can see where these gaps may be developing or expanding at these various points along the career continuum. This is where I want to come back to another one of the guiding principles that Meg went over, that we need all of our partners at the table. We had a poll earlier where we saw sort of the diversity of people who are and organizations that are represented on this webinar, and we need every single one of those organizations, every single one of you represented at the table, because across this career continuum, we see stakeholders from T20 education who are involved. We see stakeholders from educator preparation who are involved in preparing these teachers. We see practitioners at the district and school level who are involved with hiring and retaining these teachers who need to be involved. And it's very important that as we have that look across the career continuum, we are focused on having all of these partners at the table to bring data to bear and to analyze where these gaps are occurring. So let's talk about the gaps and what sort of conversations they can start across these teams. So this is mock data, as have the last few slides I have shown you. What this shows here is a way to look at whether we are maintaining, expanding, or closing gaps. So we can see that starting with the teacher population, let's say we're starting with the student population. Let's say we're starting with 50% population of white students, 50% population of non-white students. We can see between the point of the student population diversity and submitting applications, we can see already a huge gap develops. We see that the lines between these 2 points widen greatly. And we see that at that point of submitting applications, an imbalance starts to occur where we have 80% white candidates submitting applications and 20% non-white applicants. From there, over the next few steps of passing the initial screening, participating in district interviews, and participating in school interviews, we see that the gap is maintained or more or less maintained. But however, between the point of participating in school interviews and being selected, we actually see that the gap then expands a little bit. We see that more white teachers are being selected than non-white teachers. This is an important point at which a team might pause for some discussion around why this might be occurring. This would be a point at which to drill down into its root causes. What's happening within that selection process that might be influencing this, and what things might we alter about the selection process to ensure that we have a more diverse workforce. From there, from accepting offers, we see that the gap closes a little bit. We see that more non-white teachers are accepting their offer than white teachers. Again, it's a point at which this should spark a conversation across the team. What are the root causes behind that? Why are we seeing that happen? From there, I see another pretty dramatic point at which the gap develops, and that's between the 3-year and 5-year retention point. And at that point, we can see that we are really losing a lot of our non-white teachers of color. And that, again, is another point at which the team might come together and really examine those root causes. The next lens, as opposed to focusing on comparing the population of non-white teachers with white teachers, is focused solely on non-white teachers. And this lens is called the minority hiring funnel. And what it shows is the number of minority teachers and how that number either expands or contracts as you move along different points of the educator career continuum. So here, if we start with a student population, let's say in a particular district of 3,000 students of color, we can see then from there how gaps might develop as we go through public school enrollment, graduation, and into post-secondary enrollment. We see that number get smaller. As these gaps develop, we can see the most significant points of teacher attrition. And again, the purpose of this tool is to spark conversations across teams. If we're seeing a pretty dramatic drop Let's say between being certified and submitting applications, we see a pretty significant decrease here. Let's drill down into root causes. What might be some of the causes of that? Why are we certifying this number of teachers, but then a significant number less are submitting applications? Are they getting better job offers? You know, are they moving to other districts potentially to be submitting their applications rather than our district? This is a good example of a visual that can help teams pinpoint those most significant moments of attrition and drill down into root causes. The final lens that we will look at deals with parity gaps between educators and students. And you can see here represented by the two different colors, the percentage of the student population and the percentage of the teacher population. And what it does is compare whether we have roughly equivalent percentages within the student population and the teacher population, or whether there is a large discrepancy. And we can see here, let's take for example, the column for white individuals. We can see that the percentage of the teacher population, it is much higher. White teachers share a much higher percentage of the teacher population than do white students. And let's go to the next column for African American individuals. We can see the opposite here. We can see that the percentage of the student population is much higher than the percentage of the teacher population, or the percentage of African American teachers within the educator workforce. This is, of course, mock data that we are looking at, but this you can see through the visual here how this lens might spark some conversations across teams about whether we are seeing parity between the student population and the teacher population in terms of diversity. We have looked at mock data previously, but I did want to share some data from an actual state that has piloted this tool. You can see how taking a look at the gaps, and particularly the most significant points at which these gaps develop, really sparked a conversation in this state about the diversity of their educator workforce, and particularly sort of between that point of entering a preparation program and then being out and into the district pipeline. We really saw a gap start to develop, and so the team was really able to talk about some root causes for why that is, and then the team went to develop strategies to address this. We also, just for general interest, did this with national data, which you can take a look at here. We have the various stages of the educator career continuum, and you can see the year from which that data was drawn. And again, we can see how what we saw at that state level, it very much mirrors what's happening at the national level. And it's very important that we are having these conversations and we have tools of this nature to be able to take a look at these gaps and really understand what is going on in terms of diversifying the educator workforce. So what I'm going to do now is switch to the GTL Center website to show you how you can access this toolkit. So on the GTL Center website, under Technical Assistance, there is a tab for Toolkits. If you scroll down, you can select Insights on Diversifying the Educator Workforce. There are two parts to the data tool. One is a user guide. So this is intended to help teams of state education agencies, educator preparation programs, and districts who are using this data tool together to identify the right kinds of data. It helps them actually use the Excel-based data tool, and it helps give some questions and guidance for going deeper so that teams can be really carefully analyzing data, going through root cause analysis, and then selecting strategies. The tool is based in an Excel workbook. There are 3 versions of the data tool, one for states, one for EPPs, and one for districts. The reason for 3 different versions of the tool is that we recognize that each of these partners is able to bring different types of data to the table at different points of the career continuum. So there is a version for each so that that data can be entered and you can take a look across the career continuum stages that apply to the locus of control of that particular stakeholder. So if you open that up, and I'm going to open the state version here, you will see that this is based in an Excel workbook. It's intended to be practitioner user-friendly. You do not need to be a data expert in order to use this. There are tabs corresponding with each of the 3 lenses that I just mentioned, and then there are places to enter your data points from across the career continuum. If you scroll down a bit, once you enter data, there will be a place for the display graph where you can see those points entered and start to develop. So I'm just going to enter a little bit of data here so you can see how that appears on the development of graphs chart. Let's say then that we enter another data point where we actually see a gap start to develop, and you can see here that the graph updates in real time and is reflecting that data and automatically calculates the gaps as they are starting to develop. The same is true for the minority hiring funnel. The data from the previous tab automatically transfers here to show how the attrition points are happening across the career continuum for minority teachers, and then finally on to the parity gaps section.
Lindsay, you have a question in the chat pod. Do you have any state and national data that's preloaded in the data tool on the website?
That's a great question. We do not have any data that is preloaded on the website. However, I will say that we will post this webinar on, we will show you in a moment, on the educator shortages portion of our website, and you'll be able to see that data I just went over. And Meg, if there are any other questions, I actually cannot see the question pod at the moment. Any other questions to address before we move on?
I think Ryan and I have been mostly answering them.
Wonderful. If any other questions come up, please put them in the questions pod, and I'll be happy to answer those. But for now, I am going to transition my screen back to talk about the toolkit for educator shortages and special education. So I'm now going to turn it back over to Meg.
Yes, I get the super fun part of talking about shortages. I mean, who doesn't like to talk about shortages? I'm going to start with a little bit of background on the research. My guess is we have about 100 people on this webinar, and there's probably not anyone who's putting their hand up and saying, we have a shortage? Tell me more. This is a long-standing shortage of special education teachers. We have a little bit of a perfect storm going on because recently we have an increase of special education teacher shortages. At the same time, there's a decrease in our fully certified teachers. And we also have some student-teacher ratios that are going up. So, you know, what does this mean for all of us at our districts? If I'm a principal of a school, what does this mean for me? What does this mean for me if I'm an ed prep program? We know we have declining enrollments there. So, you know, this is just a snippet of a lot of research that we have on teacher shortages. We know it's a problem. And we know that we need to figure out some ways to solve this problem together. So I do want to talk, when we talk about shortages, and we all know there are shortages, that doesn't mean that there's a shortage in every single school in every single district. There are generally special education teacher shortages are having to do with specific areas that deal with equity. 90%, I mean, this is an alarming number. 90% of our high poverty schools, we know these kiddos have a lot of needs. They have difficulty attracting our special education teachers. And we have, you know, Lindsay just got done talking about diversifying the workforce, but we have severe and persistent shortages of special educators from diverse backgrounds. We just aren't attracting them. We don't have them. And this is a problem. It's a problem for us. So what do we know? We know that preparation matters. We know that if we have a fully prepared special education teacher, that they are going to improve outcomes for students with disabilities. It's much more likely than our teachers who walk into the classroom with fast tracks. So we know that. Our research shows us that. Here's the problem. We're in a district. We don't have a special education teacher that's fully prepared. What do I do? My husband's a principal. I'll tell you what they do. They hire who can teach. You have to have a person who's in front of those children. So they choose who they can. Someone with little preparation, who may have very little classroom experience, or who might not have any classroom experience at all. And so this creates a further challenge for us as we're thinking through these shortages and how we're going to solve them. We have to think about the real life of districts and what they have to do. So I want you to think about right now in the, I know we're not seeing the chat pod, in the question pod, if you can put it in there. What are you seeing in your context as the greatest challenge around special ed shortages? If you had to pick one thing, what do you think is our biggest problem? I'm going to give you a minute to just put that in there so I can read a couple of them. Okay, I'm seeing retention, teacher retention. We're not keeping our teachers. Low pay, lack of respect. There were some comments about that earlier, like teachers not even recommending that children in their classrooms become teachers. Caseload, we just talked about that, the high teacher ratio, teacher burnout, hiring people that are unprepared and no backgrounds. These are all great comments. Mental health, paperwork, legislation, the cost of higher ed. These are all really, really great answers, and they're all part of this problem. And I don't know if you feel like I'm like pounding you with the same message here, but the message is that if you think about all of these things that you're talking about, that they address all of where we are in the career continuum. So we have to be thinking about that. We have to think about short-term solutions. We can't just not think about them, because there's a principal out there right now who's starting school who doesn't have a kid, who doesn't have a teacher for those students who's in front of them, and we need a solution for that principal. How do we help you today? How do we help you make sure that those children in those classrooms are getting the instruction that they need? So what are the short-term solutions? But we have to think carefully about those, because they're a revolving door. We know that the teachers who have less preparation are less likely to be retained. So how do we create that long-term solutions? They take a lot of time. So we really have to work together as we're thinking through how we deal with these shortages. So we can sit and admire the problem. We've been doing that for decades, but we also need to think about the opportunities. We have 100 people in this room and 100,000 people out there in our country who are a part of our continuum in thinking about a framework that's going to help us to solve this problem that we have. We need to think about all of the areas, so not just all of the stakeholders, but we need to think about all of the places along the personnel system: attract, prepare, retain, all of them as we're moving forward. And that's an opportunity for us to think across all of these areas and all of the stakeholders so that we can really make a difference. So I'm going to pass this over to Ryan, who is going to tell you about the toolkit from the Learning Policy Center and give you a little bit. Oh, actually, I'm not going to pass it over yet. I have a few more slides. I know. Be excited. We are going to talk to you today about the Shortages Toolkit. There are lots of pieces in the Shortages Toolkit. I'm going to get to talk to you about a few of them. I'm going to pass it over to Lindsay. She's going to tell you about a few more. Ryan's going to tell you about his part. But you'll see here there's 4 main pieces. We have a facilitation guide that's going to help you know how to use the toolkit, a primer that's going to give you a little bit of background information, the data tool, which is going to help you dive in and really figure out what the problems are, and the selection tool that's going to help you think about all the strategies. I get so excited about doing webinars, I try to go a little bit too fast. So I want to talk to you just briefly about the primer that we have. The purpose of the primer is to really provide you with kind of a one-stop place where you can find out the latest research and the talking points for shortages. We're asking you to work across stakeholders. So what does that mean? We have to have, my friend from Georgia, if you've met Karen Weiler, talks about a common language to have a common understanding all together. We have to have that together. If we want to do that, if you want to talk about shortages with these stakeholders, we have to, you may need some of that research and some of that language and some of those talking points to work across people. And we've provided that for you in the primer. You can go to the next one, Lindsay. So I want to talk to you just briefly about a couple of briefs that we have. This first one is already available. It's already up on our website. It is an overview document that kind of highlights for you some of the research findings that are important, some of the short-term strategies that are counterproductive, so things that are not really great choices for us when we have these immediate needs, some long-term strategies that we might want to consider in this brief, and it kind of outlines it in an overview and a systematic solutions kind of way. So really great for communicating across your stakeholders. We have another brief that's going to be released shortly that's focused specifically on short-term strategies. So you come and say, Meg, what am I supposed to do when I don't have that teacher right in front of me now? Well, we're going to give you some thoughts and some ideas from the research and from best practices on what to do in those situations. And that brief's going to include some strategies like best hiring practices. What are some of my best bets if I can't hire a fully prepared teacher? And then what do I do when I get these teachers in the classroom? What kinds of intensive supports do I need to provide? And where are some resources that can help me in providing those supports? So that one's focused specifically on short-term strategies, and that one's going to be out in about a week. Go to the next one, Lindsay. So now, officially, I am passing the floor over correctly to Ryan, who is going to provide us an overview of the Learning Policy Institute Toolkit.
So am I not able to, oh, here we go. It's a larger group. All right, there we go. So thank you, Meg, and thank you, Lindsay. We, on behalf of my colleagues at Learning Policy Institute, want to thank the GTL Center and the CEEDAR Center for partnering with us both to build out a special education section on our teacher shortage toolkit, but also the opportunity to share this with you today and learn more about their tools as well. To Meg's point she previously made about that common language, our teacher shortage toolkit seeks to provide a lot of tools for a lot of different stakeholders to develop some of that common language as well, and build off of not just how we understand teacher shortages, but also understand the types of solutions and policies that are grounded in research that can help address and provide opportunities for building a diverse and sustainable teacher workforce. So with that, I want to show you some parts of this toolkit. I want you to keep in mind that there's a lot here, and there's no way, I don't want to bore you by going through everything, so I'm going to try to highlight some important tools, and then I'll also show you the special education shortage section, which we just recently built out in partnership with the GTL Center and CEEDAR Center, and then offer you a chance to ask some questions. But I do encourage you all, if you're like me, to kind of take it for a test drive. All you need to do is hand over your email, and at which point you'll have access to the toolkit, and you can explore a lot of the resources and research that we have available. So first, we provide a very high-level look and a way to message around teacher shortages in general. This kind of talking about the teacher shortage section provides you also some tips about how to frame messages in general and about where you want to try to focus your attention when talking about teacher shortages. I think a big piece here is thinking about sustainability and also thinking about how increasing the racial diversity of the teacher workforce is fundamental to that sustainability. So there are a lot of key pieces here that you can see, and these highlighted pieces again are these suggestions for messaging. And we also have the different policy buckets that the research highlights as potential solutions. And each of these policy buckets contains a high-level overview and then includes research that you can go to, talking points, and then a Q&A section that allows us to kind of think about some of the more skeptical questions you might get posed if you're talking with a state legislature or having a discussion about what might be the best possible option in pursuing that policy route. And they also help ground some of the knowledge that we all collectively have and problematize where we're at in terms of when you think of service scholarships and student loan forgiveness, access to federal loans is very different. And so that's kind of one way to think about that. In addition, there's expanded resources as well, where you can search here and find different resources based off the policy solutions and the resource types. Another key piece we have is some data or tools we use to better understand shortages. We have our Understanding Teacher Shortages map. It's an interactive map that allows you to look at conditions in each state that contribute to a healthy workforce. And these are kind of different rankings and indicators we've used across research to identify. And it goes across compensation, turnover, working conditions, and teacher qualifications. And again, this is just a way to frame that conversation. And there's a lot more data you can collect if you're looking at a specific state to better understand the state of the workforce there. Another tool I want to quickly share before going to the special education section is our teacher turnover calculator. As we've kind of talked about this notion of a revolving door and the challenges on the retention side when addressing shortages, we've sought to create a tool that helps make the costs around teacher turnover and attrition more salient in these conversations. So helping policymakers and advocates understand the costs that are spent each year to replace uncertified or underprepared teachers or teachers who leave. And there are ways you can tailor this number and this data to your specific district or school. We have ways to kind of adjust the tool. So you can do it by the number of teachers you've lost each year. You can also do it by percentages based off of the number of teachers you have in your school, the percentage you lost last year. And then you can also tailor it to the type of district you're in. Generally, replacing a teacher in a rural district is going to cost about $9,000 a year. And for an urban district, it'll be $21,000 to $22,000 a year. And these include costs related to HR onboarding and outboarding, and then also professional development for a teacher who is lost, and any other costs accrued with trying to replace a teacher. So that's a tool we like to share and kind of highlight, especially when trying to have a more grounded conversation in a common language about how much we're spending each year without doing anything to address shortages. And finally, I'll look at the special education section. So this includes the brief that we already looked at from Meg, and has that there. It also includes a series of resources and research that you can look at that speak specifically to special education teacher shortages. I'll point here, you can pull that up here. Some of the research is already embedded in the toolkit, so you can pull up the articles here. And in other situations, there are links that'll take you to the tool. So that's kind of another key way to think about how you ground a lot of these conversations in the research and the types of solutions you might pursue. Again, as you explore this toolkit, we have a lot of different things you can find and tools you can make use of, op-eds, legislative principles for residencies and service scholarships and loan forgiveness. And again, those are tools and those are policy solutions that can be tailored to your specific context and across both districts and states. So with that, I will pause and see if there are any questions. And if there are no questions, I can turn it back over to Lindsay. And I will.
Okay. One moment while I pull my screen up. Okay. So I'm going to talk briefly through the rest of the components of the facilitation guide and then take you onto our website where these are located. So the anchor piece of our toolkit is a facilitation guide that's designed to help teams implement both a combination of short-term and long-term educator talent management strategies. We heard Meg speak to the importance of making sure we have short-term strategies in place, but we also know that these have to be very intentionally paired with long-term systemic solutions that address special education shortages. So this facilitation guide is really to help state teams, again, across the educator career continuum, consisting of state, regional, local, and educator preparation program stakeholders, come together to consider short-term strategies, long-term strategies, and then come up with an approach that weaves the short-term and long-term strategies together into a comprehensive educator talent management strategy for special education teachers. Again, this toolkit is based on very similar guiding principles. Shortages are a local issue. There are issues of equity. Shortages can impact any stage of the career continuum, and because of that, we need all partners at the table. And here you can see sort of the theory of action that when we are combining short-term strategies for hiring and supporting candidates to get those immediate vacancies filled, and we are combining that with long-term strategies to attract, prepare, and retain an effective teacher workforce, that's when we have comprehensive solutions. There is also a data tool for analyzing special education teacher shortages that I will show you in a moment. This tool helps identify and visualize how these special education teacher shortages are developing across the career continuum. And when I show you this, it will look very familiar, and that's because it is heavily based on the Diversifying the Educator Workforce tool that I just showed you. Many of the lenses bear similarities, but instead of looking at diversity of the workforce, we're looking at how shortages in special ed, particularly compared to the overall population of teachers, are developing across the career continuum so that we can pinpoint the specific points where we are losing more special education teachers than the general population. That's for state teams consisting of a variety of stakeholders. And I'd be interested to know, given that we have a variety of stakeholders represented, what kinds of data sources are you currently using to examine your special education teacher shortages in your context, whether that's a state or a district or an educator preparation program? But I'd love to, if you could pop that in the questions chat pod, that would be helpful. The data tool lenses that I mentioned are around comparing the overall attrition of special education teachers with the overall attrition of the general teacher population throughout the career continuum, and that looks very similar to the development of gaps tool that I showed you for the Diversifying the Educator Workforce Toolkit. There is another similar visual that shows that teacher hiring funnel. So it focuses on the career continuum specifically for special ed teachers. So we see those most significant moments of attrition where we're losing high numbers of special education teachers. There is one final lens that is somewhat unique, and it deals with accountability score results. And this lens really identifies how special education teacher attrition varies across schools and districts based on outcomes for students with disabilities as measured by ESSA accountability scores. So what this lens is really helping partners to do is to take a look across schools and districts, particularly those that historically have been low performing for students with disabilities. Are we seeing different patterns in special education teacher attrition in those schools? So sort of bringing together the intersection of shortages and student achievement to take a look at whether we are seeing patterns in schools that are getting high outcomes for students with disabilities versus low outcomes. There is one more tool I will mention, that is our shortage strategy selection tool. So once you've taken a look at this data and performed root cause analysis, then it's really time to select strategies that are grounded in local context. So this tool, which is coming soon, is going to be an online interactive tool that will help teams identify, select, implement, and continuously improve their strategies to address special education teacher shortages. And we recognize that these strategies are heavily based in local context, so they may be things such as improving mentoring induction, creating new financial incentives for teachers, grow your own programs, improving working conditions, and et cetera, and so on. So this tool will help identify resources that can help with the implementation of those specific strategies, as well as help identify some partner roles and responsibilities, and very importantly, some funding resources for those. So at this time, I'm gonna move back over to the GTL website. You can locate our toolkit under Technical Assistance Toolkit, Educator Shortages in Special Education. This brings you to the landing page. If you scroll down, you will see that graphic that we've gone through. If you click on the various sections of the graphic, it will take you to each section. So if we click on the primer, it will take you to the place where those resources that Meg and Ryan went through are housed. You can see the brief is located there, and here's a link out to the Learning Policy Institute Teacher Shortage Solutions Toolkit. In the Facilitation Guide section, it brings up a link to the Facilitator's Guide for the entire toolkit. We highly recommend that if you are new to the toolkit, you start here. This brings up our Facilitator's Guide, which is intended to help lead teams of state, regional, district, and educator preparation personnel through a process that is based on our 3 phases of technical assistance that we talked about, and it helps teams combine those short-term strategies with the long-term strategies for comprehensive solutions for shortages. And what that specifically does, let's go down here into short-term strategies. It suggests action steps for teams to take together. It provides recommended tools and resources that can help teams as they are grappling with the action step, and it provides reflection questions for state teams to be considering as they are moving through this process of considering short-term strategies and how those combine with long-term strategies to strengthen the educator workforce. Very briefly, if we move to the data tools section, much like the Diversifying the Educator Workforce tool, there is both an Excel workbook and a user guide. We encourage you to start with the user guide if you are new to the data tool. The data tool, when you pull it up, will look very similar to those graphics I showed you earlier. There are tabs along the bottom that show data for the development of gaps between special education teachers and the overall teacher workforce. The teacher hiring funnel, showing those moments along the career continuum at which we are losing special education teachers. And then the accountability score entry page, where you can enter the data for those ESSA scores, and the output from that, which compares special education teacher attrition in schools across the district or in districts across the state. Okay, I am going to, given that we have a few minutes left, wrap us up. We know that we have given you a lot of different tools today to consider. We very much hope that you go on the GTL Center website and explore some of these tools in more depth. Again, we have user guides, facilitation guides that are there to help you, as well as some videos, particularly for the Diversifying the Educator Workforce Toolkit, that can help walk you through how to use the tools. So we encourage you to be utilizing all of those resources on the GTL website to go through these tools and think about how you can use them in your particular context. We do have a 4th and final webinar that is upcoming. It is on data-driven conversations to improve equitable access through mentoring and induction in high-need schools. So this is where we're going to be hearing some lessons learned from the state of Hawaii and their mentoring and induction program, and how they've really redesigned that program to be very responsive to high-need schools. There is also a new resource coming out from the GTL Center that is very applicable to the topics that we've been talking about today and throughout the series. It is called Flipping the Readiness Paradigm, Tailoring Programs to Address the Achievement Gap in Teacher Shortages in High-Need Schools. We anticipate that will be posted a little bit later today. So as you're taking a look through the toolkits, look for that new resource as well. We would very much appreciate your feedback on today's webinar. There is a survey link at the bottom. I believe Jenny is going to put that in the chat pod for the group. This survey will take less than 2 minutes to complete, and it will provide us some very important feedback as to what kinds of supports we can offer around these tools moving forward. I very much want to thank Meg Hammond from the CEEDAR Center and Ryan Saunders from the Learning Policy Institute for their help today. And I hope that everyone, again, completes that survey. I think, is it in our chat pod yet? That will be in our chat pod in one moment. And I hope that you take a moment, complete that chat pod, complete that survey that was just posted in the chat pod. Take a look at our GTL Center tools and resources. Join us for our webinar next week. But until then, have a wonderful rest of your Friday. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, Meg.
Hi, Ryan. It's nice working with you.
Nice to work with you.